Imagine being a veteran LAPD detective with more than 2 decades on the force, sitting in an interrogation room while other detectives quietly ask about a murder from 23 years earlier. You know how interrogations work. You know how suspects are pressured. But you don't realize that this time, you are the suspect. This was the position Stephanie Lazarus found herself in when cold case detectives reopened the 1986 murder of Sherri Rasmussen. By the time Lazarus walked into that interview room, investigators already had evidence linking her to the crime. Their challenge was not discovering who the killer was. It was watching how an experienced detective would respond before she knew the truth was closing in. The case began on February 24, 1986, in Van Nuys, California. John Ruetten left home for work that morning while his 29-year-old wife, Sherri Rasmussen, remained behind. Sherri was a hospital nursing director and had been considering whether she felt well enough to go to work. Later that day, a neighbor noticed the garage door open and Sherri's car missing. John called home repeatedly but received no answer. When he finally returned, he found broken glass outside, the garage still open, and Sherri's silver BMW gone. Inside the house, he discovered Sherri on the living room floor. Police initially believed they were looking at a burglary that had turned deadly. The home appeared disturbed, and some electronics seemed to have been taken. But the physical evidence told a far more violent story. Sherri had been shot 3 times. Before the gunfire, she appeared to have fought desperately with her attacker. On her left forearm was one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire case: a deep, semicircular human bite mark. Investigators swabbed the bite wound, preserving biological material with the technology available at the time. But in 1986, DNA testing was nowhere near what it would become decades later. The murder went unsolved. For 23 years, Sherri's family continued demanding answers while the bite mark swab remained stored in evidence. Then, in 2009, cold case investigators reviewed the file again and used modern DNA technology on the preserved sample. The result changed everything. The DNA did not point toward a random burglar. Investigators began focusing on Stephanie Lazarus, an LAPD detective who had once been romantically involved with Sherri's husband, John Ruetten. Rather than immediately accuse Lazarus, detectives invited her to what seemed like a routine interview. They told her they were reviewing an old case and that her name had appeared during the investigation. At first, the conversation was casual. They asked whether she knew John Ruetten. Lazarus said she did. They had met at UCLA and had been very close. She acknowledged that they had dated but repeatedly described the relationship as something from the distant past. She struggled to remember exactly how long they had been together and presented the romance as casual and insignificant. Then detectives asked about Sherri. Lazarus hesitated over her name, at one point fumbling between Shelley and Sherri. She admitted she may have spoken with her years earlier, possibly at a hospital, but denied any serious conflict. That denial was important because investigators had information suggesting tension between the 2 women over John. Lazarus insisted there had been no major drama, no screaming matches, and no physical confrontation. Whenever detectives pushed toward the possibility of jealousy or conflict, she claimed not to remember. Then the interview moved to another subject: stolen property and car break-ins. Lazarus mentioned that her vehicle had been broken into several times. During that discussion, she revealed that one of her guns had once been stolen from her car. It was a Smith & Wesson Model 49, a .38 caliber revolver. Sherri Rasmussen had been killed with a .38 caliber weapon. Even more suspicious was the timing. Lazarus had reported her gun stolen only 13 days after Sherri's murder. As the questions became more specific, Lazarus began to recognize that this was not a routine interview. Detectives asked whether she had ever physically fought with Sherri. Lazarus denied it and argued that she would surely remember something so dramatic. Then she asked the question that showed her instincts were beginning to take over. Did she need a lawyer? She told the detectives she knew how these situations worked, and said it was beginning to sound as though they were trying to pin something on her. Investigators asked whether she would voluntarily provide a DNA sample. Now Lazarus became even more cautious. She said she might need to speak with an attorney, What she did not know was that investigators already had her DNA. Before the interview, a surveillance team had followed Lazarus and recovered a discarded drinking cup and straw. DNA taken from those items was compared with biological evidence from the Rasmussen case. It matched the bite mark sample. Investigators also linked her DNA to material associated with Sherri's broken fingernails, strengthening the evidence that the two women had been in direct physical contact. The request for a new DNA swab was no longer essential. Detectives were watching how Lazarus reacted. She continued to deny involvement, at one point expressing disbelief at the suggestion that a past relationship dispute could mean she had killed Sherri. The interview seemed to end, but Lazarus never truly walked away. Within minutes, the veteran LAPD detective was read her Miranda rights and arrested. She was brought back in handcuffs to the same room where she had just tried to explain away her connection to the victim. When investigators re-examined the original crime scene, the supposed burglary theory looked increasingly weak. The original scene also contained details that should have raised questions earlier. A sliding glass door upstairs had been damaged, yet Sherri was killed downstairs. A VCR and CD player had been placed near the door as if someone intended to carry them away, but the blood pattern suggested the attack had already happened before those items were positioned. To later investigators, those details looked less like theft and more like an effort to manufacture the appearance of one. A jewelry box had been left untouched in plain sight. The rest of the home had not been searched like a typical burglary scene. Electronics positioned near the exit appeared to have been arranged after the violence, because Sherri's blood was already on them. Other evidence suggested a sustained attack rather than a thief being unexpectedly interrupted. Sherri had injuries consistent with a fierce struggle, and evidence indicated she had been restrained. Prosecutors argued that the burglary had been staged to hide the real motive. The case, however, was not based on DNA alone. Investigators uncovered evidence showing how emotionally affected Lazarus had been by losing John. A journal recovered from her home included entries describing her distress, her attention to John's movements, and her difficulty moving on from the relationship. Prosecutors presented a theory of jealousy and obsession. They argued that Lazarus went to Sherri's home, confronted her, and that the encounter escalated into a violent struggle and shooting. The defense attacked the DNA evidence aggressively. Attorneys argued that samples stored for more than 2 decades could have degraded or become contaminated. They spent weeks challenging the reliability of the forensic process. There were also troubling gaps in the original investigation. Some evidence and interview material had disappeared from police files over the years, and the exact murder weapon was never recovered. Even so, the preserved biological evidence proved decisive. In March 2012, after less than a day of deliberation, a jury found Stephanie Lazarus guilty of first-degree murder. She was 52 years old and received a sentence of 27 years to life. More than a decade later, at a November 2023 parole hearing, Lazarus finally admitted that she had killed Sherri Rasmussen, although she claimed she had not gone to the home intending to commit murder. The case remains extraordinary for several reasons. A homicide detective spent decades working inside the same police department while evidence from the killing remained preserved. A gun connected to her had been reported stolen shortly after the murder. An old romantic relationship gave investigators a motive to examine. Yet the case stayed cold until forensic science advanced enough to make a tiny biological sample impossible to ignore. In the end, it was not an eyewitness, a confession, or the murder weapon that solved the mystery. It was DNA preserved from a bite mark for 23 years. And perhaps the most unsettling detail is that while Stephanie Lazarus built a career investigating crimes, the evidence capable of exposing her own was sitting inside the law enforcement system the entire time. What stands out most to you? The interrogation, the decades-long investigative failure, or the single preserved piece of evidence that finally brought Sherri Rasmussen's killer to justice?